Good morning. Good morning. Why did you come here? I'm teasing. I say that tongue-in-cheek only because this is I think, an unusually demanding presentation. We're going to talk about glutamate, who I think has been the Rodney Dangerfield of psychiatry. I don't think it's gotten enough respect from us. But I'm very glad you're here. I will promise you two things. I'll promise you a lot of work. To understand glutamate will require us to stretch our boundaries of imagination and knowledge. But at the end of the day, or maybe at the end of the hour and a half, I think I will end up exciting you about the future of psychiatry in a way that mere words can't do. So we'll have 75 minutes together, and unlike most presentations, I will actually not save a lot of time for Q&A. There's that much material to cover. I will be available later, so we can actually talk about things that are of importance to you. The other thing I want to do is I want to make sure if this excites you, you have resources such as these slides, if you want them in PowerPoint to use in your own presentations, if you want the references, if you want to stay in touch with me, I would be happy to do so, because I think the future of psychiatry is glutamate. We shall see if my tall comments actually stand up to the light, to the scrutiny of light. We've already met before a few times, but my name is Rakesh Jain, and I am a colleague of yours, and of course a member of this Psych Congress family. My disclosures, the learning objectives, pretty much a grand tour of glutamate. It is. I have never worked as hard on creating a presentation as I've done on this, and I'm glad I did. There were things about glutamate I did not know, and now that I know it, I have embraced it. All right, why bother learning about glutamate? That's a fair question. I'm going to show you the Magnificent Seven. I'll show it to you twice. Once, I will be completely quiet, just look at it, and then we'll go back to it, and together we will visit it. So let's actually cover each one of these, because these 7 magnificent reasons are the reason why we have ignored this. Number one, the single most potent neurotransmitter in the entire central nervous system is glutamate. Just sheer raw potency, there's not even a close second. 2, it is also the single most commonly found neurotransmitter in the human brain. Right now, as you sit across from me, the major currency you are using in your brain right now is actually glutamate. 3, it not only plays an exceptionally large role, it is the neurotransmitter of importance in learning, cognition, and in a few minutes I'll try and convince you in mood. I don't think there's a close second, actually. 4, it is the major contributor to synaptogenesis and neuronal plasticity, 2 phrases that have not been part of the vernacular of psychiatry. I hope after today, we are no longer going to be synapse-oriented only. Right? Typically, psychiatry is nothing but presynaptic, postsynaptic, synaptic cleft, that's it. No. I would like to introduce these 2 new phrases into our vocabulary, and they're never to leave us. Synaptogenesis and neuronal plasticity, because they may be at the core of therapeutic effects of all of our interventions. And if you buy what I'm trying to sell you, you automatically just bought glutamate. Number 5, it is the major source of the creation of the single greatest inhibitory neurotransmitter in the human brain, which is GABA. God, what a democratic molecule glutamate is. It creates its own greatest foe, just because controlling itself is part of its job. Number 6, it can not only be quite neurotoxic, there probably is no more neurotoxic and neurotransmitter in the human brain when it gets out of control than glutamate. 7, oh, this is worrisome. It is so commonly found in the human brain, we thought it was not even a neurotransmitter because it's an amino acid. It's a non-essential amino acid. It is so essential that evolutionarily we decided to make it non-essential. It's that essential. I'm not playing with words, think about it. It is that important to human beings that we actually have found ways to make sure that glutamate is part of us. It was only discovered 25 years ago as a neurotransmitter. So no wonder those of us who trained back then and those of us who have trained since then simply haven't had much of an exposure to glutamate. So here's the question, well, does glutamate now have your attention? It has my attention. And I am embarrassed to tell you that I didn't know much about it until recently. But that is also true for our field, so we shall fix it. Okay, like I said, demanding. And I want you to look at the left-hand side and then the right-hand side, and I want you to see how psychiatry is shifting. We have left the shores, the relatively barren shores of neuron pathology to explain particularly depression, and we have embraced glia, particularly 2 cells, astrocytes in particular and microglia. So sure, I appreciate the fact that every textbook has shown us 2 pretty pictures, presynaptic, postsynaptic, synaptic cleft, magic happens, depression goes away. That's not very accurate. You want to be a 21st century psychiatrist, you and I will have to embrace and understand astrocytes. And look at in the middle what I'm showing you. All of these pathologies, if you have no interest in neurological conditions, but just psychiatric conditions such as schizophrenia, addictions, major depression, bipolar disorder, we are going to embrace astrocytes and glutamate pathology. Look, I'm putting astrocytes in the middle, no longer neuron. The king is dead, long live the king. The king was, queen was, neuronal pathology, but as I want to convince you in just a few minutes, that's a side player. The major players actually appear to be our glia cells. And just run your eyes around the circle, around the wheel. And I remember I asked you, you got to, and I've got to learn this whole concept of synaptogenesis. We have to learn the concept of synaptic plasticity, because our treatments are going to rely on these 2 mechanisms of action. Long live the king. And this king ain't going nowhere. So life is really simple, but we insist on making it complicated. Confucius said that a long time ago. But what if even Mr. Confucius was wrong? What if some things are actually complex? So I have 2 options now. I run away from the complexity, which I think what psychiatry's done. Because glutamate seems a little complex, we ran into the warm embrace of serotonin. But she or he hasn't turned out to be very productive for us. This whole conference has been nothing about what we're not doing well. Glutamate may be complex, but I urge you, do the opposite or run away from it. Turn into the complexity and let's learn it together. So I'll show you 2 slides, and one is the simple story, and then in a few minutes we're going to get very complex, but that's okay. What if complexities answer my patients' questions? Why would I run away from it? And by the way, all of these references I have, should you want it, just let me know. I'll put it in one single email and I'll send it to you in case you wish to learn more about it. So glutamate, sure, it's a neurotransmitter, but the things we'll have to learn is glutamate is a trisynaptic. It's not one synapse between a pre and post, but I hope you're also noticing astrocytes, which are supposed to be completely cell line, play a really important role in the life cycle. So sure, glutamate is packaged, released by the presynaptic glutaminergic neuron, goes to its receptors postsynaptically, but it is taken up and recycled by astrocytes. Therefore, who matters here? How interesting. All three matter. Presynaptic, postsynaptic, receptors, astrocyte health, all of it matters. This one, don't you run from me. Don't run. It's complicated, but it's okay. I want to walk you through it step by step, if I may. We'll take as much time as we need in order to appreciate this one. All right, so if I may, I'll use just this end of it. We have a presynaptic neuron, we have a postsynaptic neuron, but I do not want us to ignore glia. They are that important in this. So work with me on this. So we have the vesicular glutamate transporter. It's an actual transporter that allows for glutamate to be packaged. Why do you need to know that? Because in time, we will have medications that will interfere directly with this. All right, so it is released. Where is it going? To a glutamate receptor, right? But there's no such thing as a glutamate receptor. What we have are three primary receptors, NMDA, AMPA, and kainate. If you don't know them, get to know them, please. But in my field, all receptors live in the synaptic cleft, right? Not true. This is an interesting, that's why glutamate is so interesting. You can have synaptic and extrasynaptic, and you can have them live far away from the glutamate neuron. They can actually live on the glia cells. All right, stay with me, stay with me. Look at this, EAAT, excitatory amino acid transporters. There they are. They are sucking it up and removing it from the synaptic cleft. Why must you know these two things, VGLUT and EAAT? Because in time, and soon, in the next very few years, we might actually have medications that interfere with it so that we can help our patients. Go ahead and at your convenience later on, read the life cycle of glutamate. It is exquisitely well controlled. It is so toxic, yet it is so potent and necessary. The only way to manage it is to manage it. And the human body has evolved to really manage glutamate exquisitely correctly. And when it is off, we end up with two problems: neurodegeneration, loss of neuronal plasticity, and the clinical expression of it, something like depression. Like I said, glutamate is potent and, if done correctly, toxic. So guess what glutamate does? I just love glutamate for it. It is a perfect Democrat. I don't mean party, I mean Democrat. It is wanting a system of checks and balances. So it gives birth to its single greatest opposer, GABA. There are no other neurotransmitters that do this. They all seem to fight for their own space, but not glutamate. The single greatest resource, how you and I create GABA, is actually from glutamate. So the system of checks and balances is therefore maintained. But why must we know it? Why? This is all interesting, but why must we know it? It is because psychiatric pathologies and glutamate are intimately bound. So much so, ADHD. Let's go with ADHD, just as an example. What's the major class of medications we use for ADHD? Stimulants, got it. How do stimulants work? Aha, so we were taught they help release, modulate dopamine and norepinephrine. That is accurate. But what we completely missed is those two neurotransmitters put together are only about 1% of the human brain's neurotransmitter load. 1% will fix my cognition? That's not logical. Until about 10 years ago, what we found out is these two neurotransmitters actually sculpt the tone of glutamate. So even though we call them dopamine, norepinephrine compounds, at the end of the day, they actually are glutamate modulators. Indirectly, not very efficiently, but that's what they are. And again, please look at what cell I have put in the middle, because it deserves to be. It's astrocytes, not neurons. Something else that's very interesting about glutamate, it is an upstream effect, but look at what happens downstream. If you affect glutamate upstream, this is what you might actually see downstream. And this may be the reason why glutamate interventions are some of the most broad spectrum interventions we have ever seen. You will see that data in a second. But look at which receptors are pulled in, or which neurotransmitter systems are pulled in. I've got adrenergic, I have noradrenergic, actually serotonin as well, and opioid too. Upstream and downstream effects with glutamate are some of the great reasons why we clinicians just need to embrace it. I'm going to give you 3 new concepts here that you and I simply cannot ignore. If you have any interest in practicing psychiatry here forth on, there are 3 new concepts for us. Okay, 1 not so new, 2 fairly new. So here's glutamate. Glutamate is, of course, the great orchestra conductor, but what is it conducting? And I want to introduce you to 3 separate, profoundly important, relatively new systems that cannot be ignored. One of them is BDNF. You know about that one, yes? We've been staying in touch with BDNF. We talked about exercise and meditation and medications, all helping us with BDNF. I will show you in more detail where BDNF binds, and you will see how it's part of the glutamate system. But there are 2 other things there's just no way to walk away from. The first one is mTOR. Have you heard of mTOR before? If not, let today be the day we together learn about mTOR. mTOR is a kinase. A kinase is an enzyme system that helps generate new proteins. mTOR, it's a fancy name, but it's a mammalian target or rapamycin. Ignore why it got named that, because that's how it was discovered. But psychiatry and mTOR are about to have a massive, wonderful love affair that I expect to last for centuries to come. Because mTOR activation may be necessary for the 2 things I just mentioned to you, synaptogenesis and neuronal plasticity. You don't activate mTOR, you ain't got nothing. But having said that, look, your cell phone I'm pretty impressed with. I'm much more impressed with the contact you have in your cell phone. Neuron, I'm impressed with. I'm much more impressed with the dendrites, the synaptic connections it has. And say for a hippocampus, for example, 1 single neuron on average can have up to 100,000 synaptic connections. And that's why I want you to look at PSD95. What is this? I mean, there's no PSD95 in textbooks yet. It will enter it. It's that important. Postsynaptic density protein. Why do I need to know it? I'm just a shrink. Because if I want to help my patients with depression, unless I change and alter the scaffolding proteins, scaffolding, look at our room here, scaffolding. Unless I actually improve the scaffolding proteins, there actually is no alteration of neurons and dendrites. Glutamate assists with BDNF elevation, mTOR elevation, and PSD95 elevation. Remember I told you, this is a demanding presentation, and that's okay, because there are new concepts we simply have not encountered before that must be necessary. But the real party with glutamate, and this is very different than, say, serotonin or norepinephrine, the real party is inside. So in psychiatry, we've talked a lot about first messenger, second messenger. Remember? First messenger system, second messenger system. That's our excuse for why it takes 2 to 3 weeks before medications kick in. And it's actually a true excuse. But watch what happens with glutamate. The real party is inside. So where's the outside? If I want to know the inside, where's the outside? The outside is the synaptic space. This is where my AMPA and my NMDA and my TrkB, which by the way is where my BDNF, that's where they all live. But who cares? That's just the doorbell ringing. The real party is inside. But inside, what is the party? And this is where I think you, for the first time, genuinely encounter the importance of BDNF and you're encountering the importance of mTOR activation and the importance of PSD95 activation, because only through this process do you create the new proteins that not only scaffold but actually create more dendrites, which is strongly associated with the loss of depression. And pretty quick. Scaffolding must take a long time, right? How about 2 hours? How about 4 hours? How about 24 hours? As I will show you clinically in human beings, this whole process may seem complex. It is super duper fast. If you do it right, super duper fast. 2 hours, 4 hours, 24 hours. We clearly see it in both animal models and human studies. How's everybody doing? Want to leave? If you did, I would appreciate your insight. But I'm glad you're going to stay with me. This is so new. There's so many new things. That's why I will not leave your side. If what I've learned and what we have learned, we will not only share, but the only way to build this is to ask questions and repetitive learning. These are very new concepts for us. Now we got to turn our attention, folks. We now need to look at the soldiers of this system, and they are its receptors. You know some of them, but we have to get to know them all. So who are these soldiers? Sorry, I'm ignoring you guys, but if you can just follow along with me. We have a combination of ionotrophic and metabotrophic. What the heck is ionotrophic? What is metabotrophic? Ionotrophic is ionotrophic. If I can remove an ion, replace an ion, positively charged, negatively charged, what that does is immediately makes things happen. Example, somebody smokes. After how many weeks after they start smoking do they feel an effect? 2 to 4 weeks? No, seconds. Why? Ionotrophic, very, very quick. Metabotrophic. I give somebody an atypical. Do I expect it to work like 2 hours, 4 hours? No, it takes a while because it's metabotrophic. I have to create a metabolic change. Therefore, it helps. So we have, glutamate is so cool. It's got both ionotrophic army and a metabotrophic army. Which ones do I need to get to know right now in 2018? There'll be a 19 and 20 learning. I really urge you to get to know these guys. We do need to get to know NMDA, and we have to get to know AMPA. There will be time to get to know metabotrophics, because metabotrophic families, group 1, group 2, group 3, I fully expect them to be soldiers, clinical soldiers in our fight against various psychiatric disorders. Just remember, 2 families, we're going to get to know all of them. And let me show you where they live. You've already encountered this illustration, and what I want to show you is we are very lucky. We have almost unlimited engagement opportunities with the enemy. Instead of fighting this war at just one front, it's almost like watching World War II unfold. There are so many different fronts we can go at. But here I'm showing you ionotrophic and metabotrophic receptors are available to us in time to utilize to help our patients. Also get to know this, because in a few minutes I also want to tell you about non-pharmacological ways to intervene with glutamate in addition to pharmacologic. We'll have to appreciate there are 2 forms through which glutamate comes at us to help us: burst release and drip, drip, drip release. Glutamate being as important as it is, it cannot just come when you need it. There needs to be a baseline. So that's the drip, 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 drip. That comes to us from our glia cells. The burst release, I all of a sudden want to remember what my next engagement is. All of a sudden got a cell phone that requires my response. Then you get a burst release, and that is controlled by neurons. There's no other neurotransmitter I know, guys, that actually gets controlled both by glia as well as by neurons. Glutamate is simply that important. NMDA receptor, and I titled this, Oh Magnificent NMDA Receptor. Golly, it's magnificent. Nothing is more complex. Or, if you want to rephrase it, anybody had an opportunity to ever go to the Taj Mahal in your life? Has anybody had a chance to do it? Good, lots of you been there. It is simple, The same curves repeat themselves, but also magnificent in its architecture. NMDA is very much like that. So let's work our way through the NMDA receptor. So there's no such thing as a receptor. It's actually 4 separate molecules that I'll show you that come together literally like a flower that opens and closes. Just magnificent. Just a magnificent creature it is. But it is so important, and it is so damaging if it inaccurately opens or closes. It needs a coagonist. So here's the receptor. It's blocked by magnesium. I guess I can just have glutamate come in and open and close it. But evolutionarily, it's a very dangerous strategy. You guys flew in on a plane, right? Did you just have a pilot or have a pilot and a co-pilot? Why 2? One could do the job. Some jobs are way too important to trust one person. So the NMDA receptor actually trusts both glutamate and glycine. And you need both of them. The pilot needs to sign off, the co-pilot needs to sign off before this receptor will open. So we actually have sites for glutamate to bind, we have glycine receptor sites to bind, only then does this receptor open up. And then I'll show you what happens in a second. It's magnificent. If you are not very comfortable with the NMDA receptor structure and function, do so. You will help a lot of your patients. It comes with 4 subunits, as I told you. Why do I need to know that? Just file that away right now, because in time there might be medications that only work on subunits of NMDA receptor. Just know it's like a flower, literally like a petals opening up and closing. It's blocked off by magnesium. I need coagonists. I need glutamate and glycine to sort of turn the key on before this receptor opens. And it opens for milliseconds. The fastest opening and closing receptor in the human brain is glutamate. And the reason being, I need it, I can't have too much of it. I can't stop it at NMDA though. I just can't do it. Because NMDA works in concert with its great buddy, AMPA. Oh man, AMPA is so important. NMDA by itself can't do very much. It needs AMPA's help to do it. AMPA also looks very much like NMDA. It's got 4 different proteins. They're called GLU-R, 1, 2, 3, 4. And they too do the same thing. There are also 4 petals that are closely controlled. I've got lots of details here for you that when you go back and review this presentation on your own, you will be able to appreciate it. And by the way, I must request that. If you're here with me for an hour, I am honored. But the real joy of learning glutamate is not here. It's us talking, but really go back and spend at least another hour or 2 reviewing it. And if you want to do more, that's even better for our patients. No shirt, no shoes, no shirt, no service. What? I thought this was a scientific presentation, not a restaurant. The reason why I put that here is I want you to know AMPA activation is that important, that you and I actually don't get very much benefit from NMDA work unless I get NMDA and AMPA to work in concert. And it's doable. I'll show that to you. And boy, oh boy, within 15 minutes, that's why I told you, we got to get to know glutamate well. Within 15 minutes of NMDA activity, signaling AMPA activity, I can see increase in 2 things. Remember the 2 things I talked about? Synaptic plasticity and neurogenesis. It's actually visible to the eye. Under a microscope, it's visible to the eye. It can be very rapid. These are fast, actually faster than any intervention known to mankind, faster than ECT. One more time, I want to make a big deal about glutamate is important, but so is its very close buddy, glycine. It's so important, nature says important. And there are glycine receptors inside the NMDA receptor that must be activated before action happens. So my title is actually quite accurate here. NMDA receptor and glycine, it's a marriage made in heaven, not to be broken. So I could actually modulate my NMDA receptor 2 different ways, just through glutamate activity or through glycine activity. Are you with me? Clinically, I'm going to show you how both mechanisms of action can be helpful. So there you are. Don't diss glycine. Don't diss it. It is an NMDA agonist. Glutamate can do its own job too. But however, glycine is an NMDA agonist. And glycine, just like glutamate, has its home address in two different places. Neurons, that's cool, but also astroglia. We are becoming astroglia-centric in psychiatry, and it's just about time we do it. Let me start proving my case to you here. So here I have an NMDA antagonist. That, of course, is ketamine in this example. A elegant series of experiments. This is just one of them. No stress. I'm not actually showing you neuron. I hope you're appreciating what I'm showing you. This is not just a neuron. This is a neuron's dendritic connections. You expose me to stress, relatively benign stress. Just hold me and not let me move in these animal models. Release me, let me feed, let me run around, let me sleep. Hold me again. That unpredictable chronic stress does this to my neurons. Doesn't kill my neurons. My neurons don't die until very late in the pathology. What they do lose is its dendritic connections. However, ketamine, an NMDA antagonist, which would do what to AMPA? Upregulated. Which does what? You got to help me with this one. I insist you help me with this one. So I've got NMDA antagonism, I got AMPA activation. That's all on the cell level. Inside the cell, what are the three pathways I'm exerting to do exactly this? Number one was BDNF. What was the other thing? mTOR activation. What was the third one? PST95 activation. Now, and you said, oh, these are just cool sounding concepts. Yeah, they are, but look right here. Look right here. This is the ultimate effect. Rapidly. This can be as quick as minutes, 45 minutes, 2 hours. It can be that rapid. These are extremely fast working kinases. But which approach should I take? What should I do? Should I squeeze it down, be an antagonist? Should be an agonist? Not a good question, not in psychiatry. Optimization is the key phrase. So I think the way to look at it, clinically and experimentally, think of suboptimum in both areas. Glutamate being what it is, too much, really problematic. Too little, equally problematic. So my job, if I'm truly interested in the following, remember I didn't say depression. Depression is a clinical manifestation. That'll happen later. But if I'm interested in the mechanism, and if I'm interested in synaptic plasticity, cognition, improved learning, mood and wellness improvement, not this, optimization. Can I do that? And we're about to shift focus now, and we will try and do our best to cover that data. We will now look at what actually happens in humans when they get something like major depression and what happens to the glutamate. And look here, if you will, please, for a second. I am leaving the neuronal world. I'm leaving. I'm giving up my citizenship to this country of neurons. I'm moving to the new shores, and my new shores are indeed glia, particularly astrocytes. And I want you to see in depression, the evidence for astrocyte pathology is extensive. It's actually more extensive than the pathology for neurons. Everything goes wrong with astrocytes when depression arrives, all the way from decreased glutamate uptake to actual change in structure, change in function, and as I will show you in a second, increase in inflammation as well. Here, on this illustration, I would like for you to not focus on the left side because these are the mechanisms you already explored with me. I want you to focus here. Every single area of glutamate trafficking in depression can be affected, all the way from release, all the way to expression of the receptors and trafficking, and all the way to my glia, all the way back from the glia to my presynaptic neuron. All four critical steps in glutamate trafficking can be impaired and are impaired in major depression. You say, give me evidence, and I'm happy to do so. Humans. humans suffering from major depression. I'm not even looking at their brain. I'm looking at their blood. I'm looking at their peripheral serum levels for glutamate. Let me just point it out. I think words are not necessary. On average, in patients who have major depression, there is significant abnormalities, even peripherally, of glutamate trafficking. Okay, so I'm seeing quite a bit of smoke. I want to see fire. And here's fire. No pun intended. Fire, inflammation. A lot of the inflammation that we have in the human brain is not neuronal. It is primarily microglia. And microglia's major trafficking element is actually glutamate. Glutamate and GABA. GABA being the inhibitory, glutamate being the signal. And there's very clear pathways through which excess amounts of glutamate exposure for microglia ultimately leads to the higher production of microglial pro-inflammatory cytokines, IL-6, TNF-alpha, IL-1 beta, which then leads to increased central nervous system inflammation, which we now know through a cascade leads to loss of synaptogenesis and loss of neuronal plasticity. It's a problem. It really is a significant challenge. And this may be one of the reasons why we've been so stuck since 1950s with remission rates that have not budged 1%. They have not budged by 1%. TCA remission rates are no different than SSRI or SNRI remission rates, not 1% different. We have looked for love in all the wrong places. And when we got no love, we went back. Oh Romeo, where art thou? Dude, if that balcony is not working, why don't you try another balcony? We haven't though. For 60 years we have kept wailing at the same balcony. So here we go. Let me go back just for a second. I'm shifting clinical gears a little bit because depression is important, but treatment-resistant depression, of course, is a great challenge to us. Mike Theis, John Rush defined it. I still think that's the gold standard way to do it. 1 antidepressant failure, bad news. 2 antidepressant failure, it's beyond bad news. You now have only about a 15 to 20% chance of getting remission by looking for love in the same place. It really is horrible. But that's all we had. We had monoamines, followed by monoamines, followed by monoamines, followed by, how about some more monoamines? That's what we had. This is the problem though. These patients not only are continuing to suffer, their impairment keeps going up and up. You name it. You name it. I just finished, in fact, sitting there, I was reviewing a paper that I'm a co-author on, looking at what happens to people who've been hospitalized one time for major depression. And it just keeps getting worse. But I want to show you 2 slides, which probably will excite you as much excitement as you can get out of these very unfortunate situations. We actually know a little bit about what causes treatment resistance. High levels of anxiety, sure. Age of onset, sure. Intensity, sure. We have some ideas as to what causes treatment resistance, but we also know this. What are some of the predictive and confounding factors that lead to treatment resistance? I would agree with all the comments here. Patients often aren't adherent, that causes problems. Diagnosis often is incorrect, but I want to draw your attention to this in particular. Appropriate drug therapy. Appropriate drug therapy. And if all I have is monoamines, appropriate drug therapy by default means inappropriate drug therapy after 2 trials have failed. We have a pretty good idea as to why these patients are so stuck in their major depression. So let's do this. Let's now one more time shift gears, and we shift our attention now to human glutamate-centric interventions, and we, clinicians, will see what the data can teach us. But before we do so, what am I showing you here? It's a beautiful image of a neuron, right? It's actually not. It's the roadway system of Europe. It is. It looked just like, I was trying to fool you and I got you, right? These are actually the roads, and that city is Rome. I guess I'm being silly. What I'm trying to tell you is if you want to get to Rome, take any road you want to. If you want to become a glutamate sensitive or a glutamate utilizer in the world of major depression, there are many, many roads to take. And that's good. What if this road is blocked? I have another road. What if Brexit kicks in? Remember that nasty old Brexit? Then, you know what? I can come at it from France. In other words, there is no one glutamate pathway. Thank God for an interventionalist like yourself and me. There are multiple roads, but it does mean we have to know those roads. You cannot develop favorites here. All of these roads are important to us. So let's start on this journey. And I want to tell you, this is only our first attempt at it. I hope every single year you and I will get together and I'll say there were 2 more roads that opened up. Or I might say that road that looked pretty good had a lot of potholes in it. But let's find out where we are today. And we are extremely fortunate. You want to get to Rome? Lots of different ways to do it. I want you to look at the roads. The one road that is not open, and remember the first question I asked you? Glutamate reuptake inhibition, that's not available. So I'm already telling you what the wrong answer was, okay? I'm helping you out here. There is no glutamate reuptake inhibition. There isn't. We don't have that mechanism. But we're very lucky. We have NMDA antagonism. That is correct. We have AMPA modulation. We have glycine receptor agonism. Those are the 3 most prominent ones we have. But we don't have, at the moment, either a glutamate reuptake inhibitor, and at the moment, we don't have a metabotrophic receptor modulator. We don't have it right now. What we've got is ketamine, ketamine-like drugs, and then we have glycine receptor partial agonist. That's what is on the front burner in the world of psychiatry. And I want to show all of that to you. First of all, this is what NMDA receptor looks like. Oh man, nature is so gorgeous. I mean, really takes my breath away what an artist she is. Look at her. This is what she's created. This is our beautiful, beautiful NMDA receptor. The reason why I want you to look at it, there's no such thing as an NMDA receptor. There really isn't. There are subunits to it that come together to create this receptor. We will learn over time how to manipulate these. Second thing I want you to remember one more time is this is not a matter of too much or too little. This is all a matter of optimization, tuning it. And this time I've actually put medication names here for you. You can actually approach this, look at the right side, through NMDA receptor antagonism, ketamine, S-ketamine. Look at the left-hand side. I'll still do good, but I'll do it through a different pathway. I'll actually do it by making it a partial agonist. Drugs like rapastanol, D-cycloserine. Bring it in is going to be our goal. Which is the right approach? Depends on the patient. Both of them are extremely valid approaches. The next 2 slides may be why you probably came here. How does ketamine work? Right? If you got an NMDA receptor where I've been reading about it for 10 or 15 years, how the heck does it work? And I'm going to show you 2 things. First, we will look at the cell level. And that's not true. We'll look at the surface level, and then we'll go into the cell. Remember, the real party is in here. But before I can go into the party, I got to know which house to go to. So, there you go. Remember I said it's not just neurons, but it's glia too. So if I have something like, say, ketamine, these are my glia cells. If I block NMDA receptor activity that far out, what it actually can do is change the level of inhibition, removing the brake or lifting the brake on my glutamate neuron. As a result, I can actually get surges of glutamate coming from my neuron that in most part actually occupy my AMPA receptors. Let's go back because that sounds complicated. Okay, what I did far away is blocked NMDA, so I'm an NMDA antagonist, I got it. But the net action of blocking glutamate, blocking NMDA, net action on my glutamate neuron is more glutamate, not less glutamate. This is why we all got confused. Hey, I thought you said it's a glutamate antagonist. No, what I said, it's an NMDA antagonist. Therefore, what I get is more glutamate. So who cares? I care because now I got my AMPA activated. Well, who cares? Who cares? Well, the party's in here. I care very much. As soon as I activate my AMPA receptors and my TRKB, look over here if you don't mind, what I now get, can we complicate it a little bit more? Are you guys able to handle and want to handle a little bit more complication? It's an important complication to handle. I do activate my BDNF, yes. I do activate my mTOR, I got it. I do activate my PST95, I got it. Also do one thing, and this is important. I block my GSK3 kinase, and that's good. GSK3 kinase inhibited means anti-inflammatory effects. So all of a sudden, by doing just one thing, creating a party outside and then moving in-house, I'm able to create this amazing cascade that within hours, in animal models about 15 minutes, in human models 2 to 4 hours, you can clearly distinguish clinical effects from doing this. This is fast stuff. So this is what NIMH says, and I would urge you to actually look at it. It is important to note, within 4 hours to 1 day, a single infusion of ketamine in TRD patients achieves response rates comparable to that seen following 8 weeks of treatment with monoamine-based antidepressants. I'm going to go back. This is not bullshit. This is what I think psychiatry in many ways has wanted for a long time. Effectiveness, but relatively fast, but not limited effectiveness, but broad range effectiveness. How broad can it be? Now I'm going to get into it. With SSRIs, for example, what we often get is antidepressant. We don't end up with too much more beyond it. But here, with an NMDA antagonist, these are some of the things I can get. Fast, I got that, but beyond fast, I can get effects on symptom complexes that SSRIs, SNRIs do not target well, such as anhedonia, fatigue, and watch this, suicidal ideations. The downside is, it can also go away very fast. So I'll have to think this out. Sure, I want fast, but I want durability as well. I want to really press on this point. Even though we often think of antidepressants as antidepressants, with the help of these new glutamate drugs, we may be able to broaden our horizons. They may actually be real antidepressants. By that I mean the following. I don't think any human being who has depression only has the presence of psychiatric symptoms. I just don't believe that. I think everybody who has major depression has two sets of problems. They have the presence of psychiatric symptoms and the absence of mental wellness. Fine. Can a glutamate-based intervention do something about it? How cool it can. Watch this. This is a small study, but a pretty powerful study. You see the drop in all of these symptoms of negativity, such as sadness, worry, etc., worthlessness. All of it is dropping nicely. But are you watching something else climb? Not a little bit. These are not small climbs. These are 30, 40, 50, 60, 70% climbs in things that typically we don't attack in psychiatry, not with medications. I'm improving things such as calmness, energy, happiness, self-esteem. I may actually finally have a broad spectrum real antidepressant. I may also have a powerful anti-suicide agent in a way that we have not detected this signal this rapidly. This is a meta-analysis conducted by those same guys, Zarate's group in Bethesda, Maryland. This is a meta-analysis, so it's a bunch of studies, 10 different studies. One single infusion in suicidal patients of IV ketamine did this, folks. One single infusion. Now you tell me, how is this even possible unless what I was suggesting to you was actually accurate? Maybe depression is not primarily a neuronal disease. Maybe it is a glia-based disease. Maybe it's not even increasing monoamines or decreasing monoamines. Maybe it is synaptogenesis. Maybe it is neuronal plasticity. Because I don't have another explanation for showing you this. And you can't accuse me of cherry picking. I guess you could, but I would say no. 10 different studies showing exactly the same thing. There's a clear signal here. And then we have S-ketamine. So this is a different route of administering, not ketamine, S-ketamine. So I'll tell you what S-ketamine is a second, and then we'll look at the studies. And boy, 2018 has been a very good year for those of us who believe in glutamate-based interventions. So what is S-ketamine? Well, ketamine is a combination of R and S enantiomers. What S-ketamine is just the S enantiomer. Why do all this drama? That sounds like a lot of drama. Because it has fourfold, S-ketamine has fourfold greater affinity for the NMDA receptor, twofold greater potency, gets in and out much faster, which is important with these interventions. Hit, get away. Hit, get away. And it induces less lethargy, cognitive impairment, and agitation. That's what we believe S-ketamine might have value over just ketamine. But what is the data? And this is a phase 2 study that just got published in our Green Journal. And if you haven't had a chance to lay eyes on it, do so. There are some events in psychiatry that should not walk by us. They're seminal events. They cannot walk by us. The publication of STAR-D was a seminal event. CATIE is a big event. Glutamate-based interventions are seminal major seismic events in our field. What happened here? Complex study, but I'll focus primarily on phase 2 here of this study. And here they were allowed to get whatever medication they were already getting, but twice a week, not even every day, twice a week, they received intranasal S-ketamine at different doses. And what you're seeing is not just an acute effect, this is just 1 week, 2 week, but you're also watching downstream. And treatments became less and less frequent, but it was S-ketamine was administered. What you're seeing is the antidepressant effect not only was created rapidly, robustly, but also persistently. NMDA antagonism does have its clear role here. But what about suicidality? Same drug, S-ketamine, intranasal S-ketamine. Here, check this out. Patients with suicidality. I've been a researcher for a long time, and the moment you see suicidality, you know what you do? You exclude the patient. You exclude the patient. It's quite easy. You got suicidality. Psh, that's for somebody else to take care of you, not in my pretty, pristine study. Oh, it's so pretty. But no, in this particular study, we actually wanted to go out of our ways to look for patients who were suffering from this. And they were allowed to have whatever treatment they wanted. But in addition to that, they either got placebo or they got S-ketamine at 84 milligram dose. Watch this. 4 hours later, 4 hours later, which is 240 minutes later. I need to emphasize that this is what happened. S-ketamine in a fairly large, statistically significant number of patients, they had reduction and in some patients complete loss of suicidal ideations. Not all. And that persisted for 24 hours. Did not persist till the end of the study, but that buys you time to do what else you need to do. This is proof of concept, but it's beyond proof of concept. That scaffolding we talked about, the neurogenesis we talked about, these are not, Taj Mahal took 22 years to build. It did. But it seems like the scaffolding that NMDA compounds, NMDA antagonist compounds, and actually NMDA partial agonists, as I'll show you, are very rapid. Minutes to hours, not a long time. So I would urge you to look at this, folks. Glutamate-based interventions may become a reality. In fact, they will be a reality, I predict, at least in TRD and anti-suicidal, as anti-suicidal agents, and I actually really believe, and some of the research I have done, I'll show you in a second, in PTSD, it may have a role, and bipolar depression, it may have a role. Let's talk about anxiety. Next year at Psych Congress, I'm going to show you the results of 30 patients I have treated. I'm just wrapping up that study. 30 patients I have treated with PTSD, war-induced PTSD, and major depression. And I'll show you the results of our study in giving them whatever pharmacotherapy they need, but also NMDA antagonism. I'm very pleased to report the results look good, but here, I actually want to show you published results already. Yes, majority of patients who have depression, would you agree with me, also have severe and often refractory anxiety. So if glutamate-based interventions are all that and a bag of potato chips, then they better be broad spectrum. They better be able to attack depression, as I've shown you, but also anxiety. And here I'm showing you evidence the answer is actually a yes. Now let's look at another mechanism of action, and that's rapastinel. What is rapastinel? It is also a NMDA molecule, but through a different mechanism. Do you remember it has glycine? Remember NMDA receptor had glycine? Remember that? Remember there's a pilot and a co-pilot? Doesn't matter who's the pilot or co-pilot, but you need both glutamate and glycine. Okay, glycine, this particular compound, rapastinel, is actually a partial agonist. Remember, partial agonist, the term is incorrect. They're actually mixed agonist antagonist, right? There's no such thing as partial agonists. They're either antagonist functionally or agonists functionally. But anywho, let me show you the results here. And I'll show you animal data, then I'll show you human data. Watch this. If you take a human being or an animal model and you give them an NMDA glycine partial agonist, watch this. You can see near identical results in terms of synaptogenesis and neuronal plasticity enhancement, not after 4 weeks or 6 weeks. I'm talking minutes to hours. This is a seismic shift in how I think about depression and how I will be telling my patients about depression. I'm no longer be telling them, it will eventually get better, just hang with me for 4, 6 weeks, 4 months, whatever. I may be able to tell them, I can take care of this. And if you say, oh, this is just visual data, but look at this. This actually is changes in neuronal plasticity, happens in minutes. And the mechanism by which it happens is actually also equally fabulously interesting. This is a neuron. I'm no longer neuron-centric. What I am centric is who these neurons talk to through their dendrites and synaptic connections. And you can watch a compound like this, rapastinel, a glycine partial agonist on the NMDA receptor, work that rapidly to really literally sprout within minutes or hours these new synaptic connections, which translates into, watch this is now human beings, into extremely rapid antidepressant effects. I am not using that phrase extremely rapidly lightly. Look, hours, days, depending on the dose. We'll get into these details later down. You overdo it, you don't get very much. If you give too high a dose of rapastinel, it doesn't work. You give too low a dose, it doesn't work. But if you give the right doses, in this study 5 to 10 milligrams ended up being the right dose per kilogram of body weight, it is a profound and extremely rapid antidepressant effect. There you go. Let me put this together now. Which is the better approach? Not an important question. Are they both right approaches? The answer is yes. And I would urge you to look at it, both approaches, NMDA antagonism, NMDA partial agonism through whatever mechanism of action is important. So I went to the to see what are the similarities and dissimilarities. There are lots of similarities mechanistically from an animal database, but there are enough differences that we clinicians should exploit both mechanisms. Both are going to end up being our friends. They may look diametrically opposite, but if you're willing to accept this notion, they actually are not. It doesn't matter if your pathology is because of suboptimization, because of too little or too much. It doesn't really matter. As long as you bring them to the center, you get clinically and physiologically what you're aiming for. There are lots of glutamate pathologies that are known, but so are lots of glutamate-based interventions known. I'm going to show you 4 or 5 in addition to what I've shown you. I've shown you ketamine, S-ketamine, I've shown you rapastinel, but look at these compounds. These are hot on the heels of these other compounds. I don't know how many will work out, but at least you know that glutamate is not to be ignored. And what I'm offering you today is a basic understanding of glutamate. So no matter what drug comes, we'll be ready to understand it and to execute its action. Let me tell you about a couple of things. I don't think receptor modulation is a laughing matter. Do you think it is a laughing matter? It actually is a laughing matter. Are you familiar with nitrous oxide? Have you had any? They call it laughing gas. Why? Because you laugh. Why do you laugh? Why do you feel good? Why? Not true. It is because of this. It's called laughing gas because it actually is a mood elevator, but not in a psychotic way or not in a manic way. So nitrous oxide is a non-competitive NMDA receptor antagonist. It's actually in development for depression. Oh my God, I'm going to work with dentists? I hate their guts. I'm going to have to make them my colleagues. But see what I'm saying? As long as we know glutamate and what works, what doesn't work, you at your convenience hopefully will look at the study. For a whole hour, they had people breathe a mixture of 50% oxygen and 50% nitrous oxide. You look at the results and tell me it doesn't have an antidepressant signal. Go ahead, tell me it doesn't. No, so the point here is not nitrous oxide. The point here is NMDA antagonism has value and fast value. I'm not done. We've talked about no laughing matter. What about sneezing? Don't you sneeze, guys, at glutamate. And here's why I'm jokingly saying that. Remember dextromethorphan? Why should I even care about dextromethorphan? Here's why. Sure, pediatricians love it for cough suppression, all that good stuff. But I, as a psychiatrist, must get to know this because in addition to the fact that it works on opioid receptors, on the sigma-1 receptor, and inhibiting serotonin, norepinephrine transporters, it also is a non-competitive NMDA receptor antagonist. And guess what? It's in development for major depression. It's an augmentation treatment. I'm looking for love in every place because I and you really are appropriately forced into believing that monoamine neuron-centric existence psychiatry has engaged in is simply inadequate. So this one hopefully excites you as much as it excites me. Our future, I really believe, is glutamate-based. You will tell me how right I was, how wrong I was. This is very busy, and you should be delighted it is so busy. Because of these drugs, probably only a third will make it. But a third will be better than nothing. What is coming? And I do believe we have S-ketamine coming. I do hope we will have rapastinel coming. I do hope dextromethorphan will get developed. There's a good hope that D-cycloserine will get developed. They're all very different on the glutamate system. But that's okay. I want them to be different so I can exploit them. Don't you run from glutamate. It is complicated, I know, but hopefully I made it slightly less complicated. So what should I do? Should I abandon all that I've got? Ketamine or SSRI, tomato or tomato? What do I do? The right answer is, based on the data, embrace both. There is very good evidence that these glutaminergic drugs seem to work best and fastest when we don't abandon our monoamine compounds. They, at the moment, for most people, will be powerful and useful add-ons, most likely for a very long time to come. There is no reason to say I was wrong. There is good reason to say I was inadequate, and I'm looking for more help here. I would not want you to think that the only way we can manipulate this system is medications, because there are two pretty powerful glutaminergic interventions that are not pharmacological. Physical exercise impresses me on its glutamate effects, but it is profoundly interesting. It does both things. Have you, after you work out, felt energized and calm? Why? That makes no sense. You should be one or the other. But the reason why physical exercise may be the perfect poly pill is right here. Check it out. This is you while you were listening to me. Your glutamate was just going down the tubes. Mostly because I was stressing you out. I hope I'm teasing you. But sedentary lifestyle, no. But watch this. Even brief exercise does something very interesting. It increases both GABA and glutamate. In other words, it can make you focus better, be happier, be in a more enthusiastic, less depressed mood, while at the same time be calm. If there was ever a reason to recommend physical exercise, this may be it. It's a perfect poly pill in terms of offering you the best of human existence, the sense of calmness, along with this powerful, addicting feeling of pleasantness, joy, comfort, etc., that is part of glutamate. The other is mindfulness. I know I sound like a broken record, but the problem is this: it's that effective. So I can't walk away from it. Meditation, inexperienced, even non-experienced individuals, there's very clear signals of different trafficking in glutamate with a physical exercise as well as mindfulness practice. Let's wrap up our time together. So in conclusion, I want to say this to you. Read this with me, if you will. The consequences of our previous narrow monoamine-centric view has been this, folks. This is very, very, very worrisome. None of the antidepressants we have had so far, none until now, have focused at all on the major pathology in psychiatry, in depression, which is astrocytes. We have nibbled. We have not taken a big bite out of it. And this may be because of this. We simply hadn't had the chutzpah. We haven't had the audacity to think big. We discovered a monoamine, so we stuck to it. And therefore, drug companies have stuck to it. And therefore, we have stuck to it. And therefore, publications have stuck to it. And this is why we should know and understand glutamate in depth. You really should read this. It's worth it. Glutaminergic transmissions is generally believed to be significantly impaired, particularly in depression, but it may actually be all major neuropsychiatric disorders. And glutamate homeostasis is critical to both wellness and disease processing for us. So how do I ever possibly walk away from glutamate? Thank you very much for letting me present. Thank you. Thank you. Because I've sucked up all your time, I will not cut into your break. Go forth and have coffee, and if you have questions, I'm going to be right here. Thanks very much.